We're just waiting for a couple more people for their computers to log them in. Welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We are so glad that we have a number of you joining us today, and I know there's a lot that are interested in watching this grow later, so we're glad that we can record it. We have Merinda Cutler, who is our Director of Advocacy for our immigration work here at MWEG, and Alexa Alvarado, who is our Assistant Director of Immigration and Advocacy work here at MWEG, who are going to talk to us about the possibilities of mass deportations under a new presidential administration. So I'm going to turn the time over to Merinda to kind of explain what that is and why it's important to us here at MWEG. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, and glad that you all could join us and those who are watching this later. These are kind of crazy times, aren't they? I just finished watching the judiciary hearing, a 2-hour hearing. Yes, I think it was 2 days ago that they did about the potential of mass deportations. And there's lots of finger pointing, lots of drama. And we really want, Alexa and I were talking before about how there was a lot of fear and anger surrounding immigration in the campaign rhetoric, and it's easy to fall into that still. And so we really we're going to talk about some of the details of what mass deportation might look like, but really the reality is there's just a lot of unanswered questions, and we aren't legal experts, but we will talk about some of the terms because I think it's important to understand, and share some resources so you can do deeper dives if you want. And then we'd like to focus on things that we can do, how we can increase proximity, community, and concrete action, because there are a lot of things within our power, so that we don't just get into an emotional spin. Though I think the emotions are important, we just need to channel them towards positive action. And really glad to have Alexa here. She's like, well, I guess I should introduce myself. So I live in Salt Lake City area, but I formerly lived in Texas, and I'm the Immigration Advocacy Director. And Alexa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Alexa Alvarado. I'm in South Florida, and I'm the Assistant Advocacy Director.
Okay, cool. And Alexa, I didn't ask you to do this beforehand, but I think you can. Could you just briefly explain to those here and listening our trip to DC that we did just like, was it a week or two after the election, and what we did there? Because I think a lot of times it feels like nobody's doing anything and Congress isn't doing anything, but which is true in a lot of senses. But tell us about that.
Yes, and that was somewhat confirmed when we went. But it was the National Immigration Forum had a conference that I think Merinda's been before, but they held it in DC this year, and I got to go with Merinda and another MWEG volunteer, Liliana Bolaños. So the first day there were lots of speakers and panelists that talked about what's about to happen, right? It was a week after the election, so there was a lot of feelings and questions. I think for me, it was great to see so many people that care and are concerned. And then also, there was even business leaders there, the Chamber of Commerce, from different areas, law enforcement. So getting to hear from lots of perspectives on just immigration in general, but also what we might see in the next 4 years, and instilling some hope too, right? That things can be rebuilt if there are issues, and that there's a lot of people that do care. And for me, it was really great. So the first day was the conference itself, and then the next day we had lots of legislative meetings. I think between all of us, there was about 8. We delivered a lot of the letters that MWEG members had submitted by that day. And so we were printing and sorting them into folders. And there was almost 200 letters that were delivered. And we spoke to a lot of people. We know that it's their terms. So for some, their terms are ending. Some are waiting for the next Congress to come in. But we shared our thoughts and feelings, and also the concerns of the members of MWEG, and we let them know. Right, like they might not do much at this point, but we let them know that we're watching.
Sorry. Thank you, Alexa. Yeah, and it really, like, I feel like it can be discouraging, but when we're able to take action like this and gather with others who are working together, and I want to emphasize that the National Immigration Forum really tries to be nonpartisan, as we do, and we feel like that's the only way we can get things done, right? Like, I mean, when the numbers are still coming in about the election results, but we are still in a nation that is bitterly divided on a lot of issues, you know, almost exactly right down the middle. And this immigration issue is huge. I mean, the fact that so many people voted for Trump, who was promising a lot of things for immigration, says that a lot of people want things to happen. And we at MWEG, we need to practice our peacemaking skills. We need to lovingly approach all the people in our world that we can and open these conversations and talk about, like, why does this matter to you? What do you think we can do? Instead of pointing fingers and saying like, oh, it's just a problem that can't be solved, or we need to just get rid of all the immigrants. There's something in the middle that we can do, and we want to focus on that. And I also want to acknowledge that as MWEG members, we are, like, I don't want to create this false impression that it's us versus them, because I talked to so many MWEG members who are immigrants themselves, some of them undocumented. Many of us are married to immigrants. We have immigrant children. We have neighbors who are immigrants, and I'm in this immigration space, and so I tend to ask more probing questions of my friends who are immigrants, and I am often surprised how many people I know who are undocumented. And with Trump becoming president and the fear and worry that people have, I've been checking in with some of those friends that I haven't seen for a while that I know have been undocumented in the past, and without exception, they are all still undocumented and very worried. And so we'll talk a little bit more about things that we can do to help. But we wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the terms, because to say mass deportation, what does that mean? And we would love for you to put in the chat any questions, any specific questions that you have. We can't promise to know the answer, but if we don't know the answer, we'll tell you, and that gives us ideas about things that we can cover in future posts, and we can think about it and share resources with you later. So please put those questions in the chat if you would like. And yeah, so let's talk, and yes, we are not experts. Want to be clear on that, but let's talk about the different groups of people who might be included when we're talking about mass deportations. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Alexa?
Sure. So one of the many concerns are people that have some kind of temporary status, right? So when you hear the term TPS, the temporary protected status, Springfield, Ohio was one example of the Haitian migrants who moved to Springfield, and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance said that that program was illegal. So if it's not, it's totally within the power of the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. But if they are to remove those protections, then a group like that could be at risk of deportation. DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is another group that could be targeted. And asylum seekers that maybe are still in the middle of the process many times are undocumented. They don't have any kind of legal status. Their cases are pending. They might have a work permit, which can sometimes lead to confusion, and they think they're somewhat legal, which is something like they're trying to, there's a lot of advocacy groups saying like, just because you have a work permit doesn't mean you have a permanent status, right? So clarifying that for lots of people. So there's people that have a legal status that is not permanent. The concern is that if that protection is removed, then they can easily be targeted because they are renewing their status regularly with the government. And so the government knows where to find them, right? Part of kind of jumping ahead, but sometimes there's deportation orders for someone who maybe had an asylum case or something that didn't go through or it wasn't approved. But if a person like stops attending their hearings or moves away, then immigration might not know where to find them. And so that deportation order is just, there, it's pending. The deportation hasn't taken place. You can have temporary protected status and a deportation order, but because you're like, for example, with temporary protected status for certain countries, they can't deport you at that moment because your country of origin has that protection. So if they remove that, then deportation orders are in play. But yeah, so some of the biggest concerns are that these groups that have a legal status and are working legally within the country can lose their protection and then be deported.
Yeah. And you mentioned this, but I want to emphasize that because Congress it's been decades since they have enacted immigration reform. So like Dreamers are a huge group of people affected by Congress's inaction. And so Obama started the DACA program, but it has been, so that is executive power that Trump can overturn. But right now, DACA is under a lot of pressure because of various court cases, and you can't currently apply for DACA because of the court cases that have struck it down, because ultimately Congress has to pass legislation to protect Dreamers and give them permanent status. Congress has not done that. So in that power vacuum, Trump can come in and end these statuses, protections for people coming from countries that it's not safe to go back to, children who came here, and asylum seekers and others. So yeah, it's important to remember that yes, Trump does have the power to do some of that. However, their rule of law applies to immigrants and to citizens, and we want to really, and a lot of people are keeping an eye on, and at the end of the day, rule of law has to be upheld in these deportations. So for instance, as Alexa mentioned, people who have deportation orders, they can legally be deported. But there's a lot of talk. People, when I talk to like my husband, he keeps saying, we just need to deport. We'll just deport the criminals. Well, what does that mean to deport the criminals? How do you define a criminal? And are we talking about somebody? There's a difference between criminal charges and civil charges. And Alexa, you're better at talking about this. Do you want to talk about the difference between those and then expedited removal?
Yeah, a little bit. Like we said, we're not attorneys.
Right.
But so if you were here undocumented, right? So you overstayed a visa, or you're not like permissible, or you don't have the documents to actually be here in the United States, then it is a civil offense. It's not criminal. And so it's tried differently, right? And when we talk about criminal versus civil, some people think, well, that's you're breaking the law, so you're a criminal. But in legal terms, to be here undocumented is not a criminal offense. And so it gets a little tricky. And what the concern too with that is that sometimes because you're undocumented and you do something, and I told Merinda about this earlier, like I knew someone who was stopped because the tints on their car, like on the car windows, were too dark. So they're illegal tints, and they were stopped. They didn't have a license. And so those like multiple infractions were then combined with his undocumented status was enough to be a deportable offense, right? And so he was reported to ICE, detained, and that's where things can get really tricky, because is he a criminal because his tints were too dark? Some people might say yes, right? And he was driving without a license, because here in Florida, we don't have, Utah and some other states might provide some form of permission to drive, right? Even if it's not like a complete driver's license, but here we don't. And so it's being careful on like, what do we mean by criminals? And I always remind people, it's like, well, being undocumented itself is a civil offense, and is that enough to deport someone? And those are the kinds of conversations we need to have. And with expedited removal, you might hear that term a lot. It mostly applies to the border. It's just a quicker process to, like, you don't have permission to be here, you don't have documentation, right? Like you don't have any kind of visa, tourist visa or whatever, to be here, so you can easily send them back across the border. But there are certain protections for people that have been here longer than 2 years. It's a little, we're still learning about that. There was a Supreme Court case, I want to say in the early 90s, that said that if you've been here for a certain amount of time, that you have to see a judge. You can't just be deported that easily. But there's always the concern if there's some way around that. But for now, we know that there is a protection for those that have been here for a longer period of time. So expedited removal, think mostly people that have recently arrived, and especially those that are at the border.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then another just couple more things that I think are important considerations as you hear about mass deportations, and that is the interplay between the state and the federal law enforcement and rights and responsibilities there. At the end of the day, immigration enforcement is a federal right, and it's outlined in the Constitution clearly. And so states can have some latitude in how much support they want to give to that enforcement. And so that's why you hear the term sanctuary states. And so ICE can come into a state, but whether the local law enforcement is going to cooperate with ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, is up to those local governments. Now, the federal government can put pressure on them through pulling funding and creating contracts and different things, but there's some tension there, and we're seeing governors speak out in different ways in local governments as well, and so that's a place where we as citizens can engage and talk to pay attention. First of all, like if you live in Utah, Governor Cox has recently put out a statement basically saying that he's going to support Trump's plans, though he specifically mentions we're going to support detention and deportation of dangerous criminals, and he talks about drug dealers and people that everybody generally agrees that we need to not be threatening our public safety. But there's some nuance there. Like Alexa said, with the tinted windows, like there's kind of a spectrum of how you define a dangerous criminal. So, and we won't get into too much detail about that, but I think it's important to know, like there's a lot of issues with just funding and levels of expertise. So local law enforcement, they're not trained to conduct immigration proceedings, And so asking them to do that and also doing it as an unfunded mandate is difficult. And it also puts local safety at risk because if people are worried that local law enforcement are going to come and round them up and put them in detention, then they're less likely to report crimes and see their local law enforcement as a partner in that. And so, I mean, community is an important aspect to consider in this, and really there's a lot of just philosophical, ethical questions about like how do we define who an American is. Alexa's written a really great op-ed that hopefully you'll see soon, getting into those questions, and I won't try to say your words, Alexa. Continue my thoughts.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. My parents are immigrants from Costa Rica. I was born and raised in the US. But it's, talking about like the philosophical and ethical, right? Like what do we define as American? And we know Stephen Miller's thoughts right before the election were the America's for Americans only. And so, what does that mean, especially if he's going to be advising Trump on his immigration policies? Like who will be targeted and what does that look like in practice? And so I think, well, I don't want to get too much into this, but sometimes you do hear even Latinos saying that they support Trump, right? And other immigrants that say, well, he's just going to fix things, the economy will be better. And but I think we sometimes people oversimplify and say, he's just going after criminals. But we know that he's promised, when he talks about mass deportation, he talks about a lot of people and saying that all the undocumented are criminals, right? That he kind of starts making blanket statements, and that's where we're hoping we're praying that that the rule of law will prevail and that our justice system will be just, and that people will stand up for what's right. I think that's, and so I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go into.
No, I think those are really great questions to consider. And I love that you mentioned prayer, because I mean, it always sounds a little trite, but as women of faith, we know the power of prayer. And sometimes that's all you can do, right? Like we don't understand it all, and we can't protect everyone who we love in the ways that we want all the time, but we can pray that that cooler heads will prevail, and that the super smart and powerful people will use their power and their gifts for good. So yeah, thanks for that. So again, we just want to I want to emphasize that we say I really love Elder Karen's talk about how their story is our story. But I've been thinking about that term, and like I said earlier, like I think we need to be careful of an us versus them mentality. And yes, their story is our story, but really it's just our story. We're Americans. We have immigrants in our communities who are contributing to our lives in important ways, and are in our families and are us. And so it's just our story, right? And so I've been trying, it's easy to do stuff on my computer and go to work and do the things I'm doing, but I'm trying to increase proximity to people who are working on immigration issues locally. And it turns out there's a lot. So here in Utah, MWEG is helping to collaborate a family legal clinic and a family preparedness event. It's December 21st, and I will find the links and share them with you. I forgot to find them beforehand. But it's at the Sorensen Unity Center, December 21st, 10 to 2 p.m., 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And so we'll get the link to that in the chat but families are welcome to come. They can sign up and make an appointment to meet with an immigration attorney and have a free consultation. They provide a list of documents to bring so that you can move your process along wherever you are in trying to get legal status. We'll also have a folder for every family where with lots of details about how to do a family preparedness kit. Because when you start thinking about what deportation might look like for mixed status families, it's truly terrifying, honestly, because they, well, Alexa, would you explain it? And I'm going to find the link. Explain what families need to think about and what they'll be facing.
Yeah, so there are like legal clinics, but there's also these family preparedness plans that are being shared in by different organizations in different states, right? So sometimes your area might need specific information, but overall what they share is that, you know, every family should have a plan in place in case one or both parents, you know, if they're undocumented or don't have a permanent status, if one of them is detained or deported at some point, that, you know, children have a place. Like who are the children going to stay with? Who do you contact? Where can you find the paperwork that's needed, right? Like there's sometimes you have to like prove what country you're from. You need to momento, baby. There's different things that like you have to start considering, like maybe that only one parent has the legal status. So how will they provide for the family if their spouse is detained or deported? And you know, there's like legal paperwork, right? Guardianship, different things that you have to think through, so that I mean, no one in the end is emotionally prepared for this, but at least certain precautions are taken in case something happens. I'm trying to remember the other pieces. There's several plans out there, but I think it's important. Like if you know someone that doesn't have a permanent status or is undocumented, right? Like sharing that with them would be really helpful, if you feel comfortable sharing that, of course, so that they can think through all the possibilities.
Yeah, yeah, and Alexa and I were talking earlier, and I mentioned that I think more of us know undocumented immigrants than we realize. And if you if you're close enough with them and feel comfortable, you might ask people that you're not sure about their status and be, you know, sensitive and compassionate as you do so, and offer to help. You know, if you have the means, offer to help pay for legal fees. If you can connect them to a competent attorney. You know, there are some predatory attorneys out there. So sometimes people think that their case is moving forward and their attorney has dropped it or whatever. And so if you can help them find trusted resources, there's a lot of community clinics. And then and something that people don't know necessarily is when you're working on your immigration case of getting status, it helps to have a character reference sort of letter, and so you can offer to write those letters for people that you know, and that can be really impactful. And they might not want to ask that. They might not think that they could ask that of you, but I've done it for a few people, and it's such an honor to be able to speak out for them, you know, from my place of power and citizenship, and say, look, I want this person here, and I think they're contributing to my community, and vouching for them can be really powerful. And let's see. I am looking for this research. Okay, so I put in the chat the Utah event, and there's a volunteer sign up as well there. And let's see, I found the Utah, that resource guide. So the Utah Immigrant Advocacy Coalition has a resource guide that they just put together that is super helpful. Let me just find the link. But let's see. So the Olson family asked, what type of promise? Sorry, were you going
No,
to
I
say
was just going to
something?
say there's a question in the chat
Yeah, would you read that?
Go ahead and look for.
Yeah.
So it says, what type of
Multitask.
promises did Trump commit to during his presidency in 2016, and how likely is it that those things would come back in play? I just remember kids in cages, which was too dark of a topic for me to even think about. But this time around, I would like to be more prepared to understand what is happening so I can speak to it and help in whatever way my mental health can handle. So Trump, I mean, he won his presidency with the, build the wall talk. And depending on who you speak to, he was successful, and some say he was not, right? I'm sure we'll see more of that. Everyone's added onto the wall in some way or another. The wall is the wall, right? There's different strategies. I think at this point, everyone knows like it's more technology, and there's different ways of securing the border. It's more than just a wall. So I think that argument has gotten a little old. At least I hope so. And I know at least when we visited the border earlier this year, there's certain places where you need a physical barrier, and there's other places where it's not. It's a waste of resources. And so I don't think we'll see that come back. Family separation was huge during the first Trump administration. There's mixed feelings there, of course. I think this is a very painful point for all of us. So there's a lot. If you want to read an amazing piece on family separation, and totally be prepared for an emotional piece there. It's by Caitlin Dickerson. I can't remember the exact title, but if you look up The Atlantic and family separation, it goes into all the details. It's investigative reporting at its best, in my opinion. And she won a Pulitzer Prize for it. So it's great. My concern with that is, yes, we can probably see that happening again, but I think there was a lot of people cared and people spoke out, and they had to stop it. So I don't know if they would be, but these are those things like, we don't know. Can they just, they've said they'll deport families, entirely like together. They might find other strategies. I don't know if we touched on, there's certain powers under the Immigration and Naturalization Act, which kind of is the main piece of immigration law, where he can just stop, to a certain extent, he can stop the entry of all non-citizens. There are limits to that power. So maybe he's going to play with that. I really, really, really hope that we do not go down the family separation route. What we also saw in the first Trump administration was, in terms of immigration, I think it was open during the Trump administration, but for sure he was expanding it, is a denaturalization office that goes under DOJ, and it investigates people that have applied for citizenship. I don't know a whole lot about that. I just remember reading an article in the Miami Herald here, and it was about a woman. She was Cuban. She'd lived here for like 30 years. At this point, like, she was a grandmother, and she had her family here. She had she went to jail for, maybe prison, I don't know. It was like check fraud. She served her time. She was a legal permanent resident when it happened. And once she had served her time and was able to apply for citizenship, she did not include that on her citizenship application, and they wanted to revoke her citizenship. That's something we could see more of, right? Like, there were promises of like really expanding that office and investigating people that have been naturalized. And so things that could come back, those are the ones that I'm keeping an eye on. But I think they've made there's a lot of new ideas out there, from removing, well, the refugee program was also almost annihilated because it's a strong word. It was made very tiny. It was totally, I don't want to say decimated. It's coming back. And
Yeah,
I'm trying to stay positive, people. I don't know. Is there anything from the first administration that
is
that you want to touch on, that you remember?
Yeah. Well, so I was working at Refugee Services of Texas as a volunteer coordinator when Trump became president the first time, and they slashed the refugee numbers in less than half, and it was really interesting because we had to lay off really amazing workers because we weren't getting the federal funding, but it was interesting because the community came out in force. Like I would get to school, I would get to work, and I would have like 20 voicemails every day from people saying, I want to help. How can I help? And what we would tell them is, I'm sorry, we're not resettling very many refugees right now, but contact your legislators. Let them know that you want legislation passed so that we can have more people come. We recognize that we want them, we need them. And so I put in the chat the link to our call to action. I put a lot of things in the chat, so but you'll see it because it call to action, urge federal elected officials, and I also wanted to mention that during that time, there were just little things that people can do that I would like to do again in that effort to create proximity and support for those on the ground doing the work. People would just show up with, they'd come to our resettlement agency and bring us flowers or bring us cookies and say, thanks for all you're doing. We had several groups have their kids and families write just generic letters saying, we're glad you're here. And so when our refugee clients would come into the office, we'd just hand them a card. We do the same with gift cards. Like, here's a gift card. We can't help you get your benefits right now, but here's a gift card to help you get groceries. So there's little things that we can do in our communities to just let people know that that we're with them, and also let our legislators know that we expect them to make the system work. We need checks and balances. We need the judiciary, the executive, and the Congress to keep each other in check and make sure that the rule of law is working for everyone, not just citizens, but also refugees and immigrants, because they have rights under the Constitution and they also have universal human rights that we need to uphold. And so there's a lot that we can do. Let's see, looking at my list. I also put in the chat the red card link. It's a printable card that you can share with those who are concerned about ICE coming to their door, and tells them what they have a right to do in that situation. And I'm going to put in the chat as well some resources that Paulette of our Idaho volunteer, she shared. So if you happen to be in Nevada, did I say Idaho? I meant Nevada. These are some resources. She suggests Lighthouse Charities. They focus on ESL skills and job training, and then 2 refugee resettlement agencies, as well as the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you find these organizations in your communities and support them, because their resources are very limited at this time, and they're working hard to get things done and to help people. And there's a lot that you can do to support. And Kathy says, in terms of being frustrated and feeling like we are a tiny drop in a tidal wave of adverse action, I recall the history of the civil rights movement and how many, many years it took to bring about lasting change. I realize we don't have years. We want to prevent good people from being deported in the immediate future. That said, I'm sure the early leaders of the civil rights movement were discouraged and felt like they were up against a massive bureaucratic system in addition to unfortunate attitudes, but they persisted and ultimately made lasting changes. I love that, Kathy. That's so true. And it's easy to look back on history and see, oh, those were heroes, and I'm just little old me, but there are the movement is large of people who want to do right by God's children in our country. And I am encouraged by you all being here with us, and would love to continue this conversation in MWEG Central and in social media, and even more. Let's get out into our communities and get proximate with immigrants we know and love, and meet new ones, and stand up in support of our friends and neighbors. you have anything to add, Alexa?
Sorry, I was responding to a
Oh,
housing for refugees, but I think I'm always comforted by the fact that so many of you care, right? That it's not sometimes I hope that it's the the people that really want these mass deportations are the minority. And when we were in DC, we met with Congresswoman Salazar's office, and one of her staffers said, you know, even if they do start to deport people, even those that held those signs for mass deportation will realize, wait, like this person that lives down the street from me, who's a great person, is now being deported. And when people start to see things like that, that they will see immigration differently, and they hopefully will speak up. That's what I hope for, is that whatever happens, if the people will speak out. I think right now it's praying, and these ideas that Merinda's been sharing, like it's a great way to comfort those that are in fear, and to just build community. And especially now during Christmas time, I think it's the perfect time to show love and compassion for everyone, and prepare, for next year.
yeah. Yeah. And I forgot to mention, but it's an important one, but it's a big commitment. But there are many MWEG members and others in all of the nation getting involved in the Welcome Corps program. I put the link in the chat, but it's a really great way to get involved, to gather a group of people to become your own mini resettlement agency for one family. So thank you so much, you all, for joining us. And sorry we went over the 30 minutes, but this has been a great conversation.
It's okay. Thank you, Merinda and Alexa, for teaching us today, giving us some great resources that we can share. I will share those back into the Grow area of this Grow with the recording, so that you can go back to those if you didn't catch them all today. And we will continue kind of with our grows. We have one more through the end of the year, talking about peacemaking, and with Sarah Perkins. And we may have a bonus grow with her advocacy about the presidential appointments. So keep an eye out for that. But we are thankful that you all joined us today, and we love the discussion and questions that people put in the chat. So thank you so much to Merinda and Alexa and everybody for being here. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.